Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, truth seekers and freedom fighters, it's your host, Millions, here to guide you through another vital chapter of our story. Tonight, we gather our minds and spirits to revisit one of the most powerful speeches ever spoken. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s, "I've been to the mountaintop. Let me take you back." The date, April 3rd, 1968. The place, Mason Temple Church of God in Christ, Memphis, Tennessee. The why, Dr. King had come to stand shoulder to shoulder with the striking sanitation workers of Memphis, a workforce of black men demanding dignity, better wages, and safer working conditions after decades of neglect and the tragic deaths of two workers, Ecole Cole and Robert Walker, crushed by faulty equipment. In the days before this speech, the tension in Memphis was heavy. Nonviolent marches had been met with violence. The air crackled with threats. Even King's life had been threatened repeatedly, and he knew it. Yet he stood before that crowd, unwavering, his voice thunderous yet tender, painting a vision that stretched from the streets of Memphis all the way to the Promised Land. That night, he told us he'd been to the mountaintop. He told us he'd seen the Promised Land. He told us he might not get there with us, but we would get there as a people. It would be his final speech. Less than 24 hours later, Dr. King would be taken from this world by an assassin's bullet on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. But what he left us can never be silenced. Tonight, we remember not just the words, but the mission behind them: to lift each other up, to fight injustice, to speak truth to power, and to stand together until the dream is real for all. That mission is alive today. And it's up to each of us to keep the good fight going. That's what Executive Orders Watch is about, keeping our eyes open, holding leaders accountable, and standing up for freedom every single day. Our motto is simple: for democracy we live, for democracy we die, for. If you're ready to do your part, stay informed, and be part of this movement, go to amillions.org to learn more. Join the watch, be the change. So open your hearts, open your minds, and let the spirit of the mountaintop move through you. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the one and only, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I've been to the mountaintop.
Thank you very kindly, my friends. As I listened to Ralph Abernathy in his eloquent and generous introduction, and then thought about myself, I wondered who he was talking about. It's always good to have your closest friend and associate say something good about you. And Ralph is the best friend that I have in the world. I'm delighted to see each of you here tonight in spite of a storm warning. You reveal that you are determined to go on anyhow. Something is happening in Memphis. Something is happening in our world. As you know, if I were standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of general and panoramic view of the whole human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, "Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in?" I would take my mental flight by Egypt through, or rather across the Red Sea, through the wilderness on toward the Promised Land. And in spite of its magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would move on by Greece and take my mind to Mount Olympus, and I would see Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assembled around the Parthenon as they discussed the great and eternal issues of reality. But I wouldn't stop there. I would go on even to the great heyday of the Roman Empire, and I would see developments around there through various emperors and leaders. But I wouldn't stop there. I would even come up to the day of the Renaissance and get a quick picture of all that the Renaissance did for the cultural and aesthetic life of man. But I wouldn't stop there. I would even go by the way that the man for whom I'm named had his habitat. And I would watch Martin Luther as he tacked his 95 Theses on the door. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, "If you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy." Now that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick, trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men, in some strange way, are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same: we want to be free. And another reason that I'm happy to live in this period is that we have been forced to a point where we're going to have to grapple with the problems that men have been trying to grapple with through history, but the demands didn't force them to do it. Survival demands that we grapple with them. Men for years now have been talking about war and peace, but now no longer can they just talk about it. It is no longer a choice between violence and non-violence in this world. It's non-violence or non-existence. That is where we are today. And also in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done, and in a hurry, to bring the colored peoples of the world out of their long years of poverty, their long years of hurt and neglect, the whole world is doomed. Now I'm just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period, to see what is unfolding, and I'm happy that He's allowed me to be in Memphis. I can remember when Negroes were just going around, as Ralph has said, so often scratching where they didn't itch and laughing when they were not tickled, but that day is all over. We mean business now, and we are determined to gain our rightful place in God's world, and that's all this whole thing is about. We aren't engaged in any negative protest and in any negative arguments with anybody. We are saying that we are determined to be men. We are determined to be people. We are saying that we are God's children and that we don't have to live like we are forced to live. Now, what does all of this mean in this great period of history? It means that we've got to stay together. We've got to stay together and maintain unity. You know, whenever Pharaoh wanted to prolong the period of slavery in Egypt, he had a favorite formula for doing it. What was that? He kept the slaves fighting among themselves. But whenever the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court, and he cannot hold the slaves in slavery. When the slaves get together, that's the beginning of getting out of slavery. Now, let us maintain unity. Secondly, let us keep the issues where they are. The issue is injustice. The issue is the refusal of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with its public servants, who happen to be sanitation workers. Now, we've got to keep attention on that. That's always the problem with a little violence. You know what happened the other day, and the press dealt only with the window breaking. I read the articles. They very seldom got around to mentioning the fact that 1,300 sanitation workers were on strike, and that Memphis is not being fair to them, and that Mayor Loeb is in dire need of a doctor. They didn't get around to that. Now we're going to march again, and we've got to march again in order to put the issue where it is supposed to be and force everybody to see that there are 1,300 of God's children here suffering, sometimes going hungry, going through dark and dreary nights, wondering how this thing is going to come out. That's the issue. And we've got to say to the nation, we know it's coming out. For when people get caught up with that which is right and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory. We aren't going to let any mace stop us. We are masters in our nonviolent movement in disarming police forces. They don't know what to do. I've seen them so often. I remember in Birmingham, Alabama, when we were in that majestic struggle there, we would move out of the 16th Street Baptist Church day after day. By the hundreds, we would move out, and Bull Connor would tell them to send the dogs forth, and they did come, but we just went before the dogs singing, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round." Bull Connor next would say, "Turn the fire hoses on." And as I said to you the other night, Bull Connor didn't know history. He knew a kind of physics that somehow didn't relate to the trans physics that we knew about. And that was the fact that there was a certain kind of fire that no water could put out. And we went before the fire hoses. We had known water, If we were Baptist or some other denomination, we had been immersed. If we were Methodist and some others, we had been sprinkled. But we knew water. That couldn't stop us. And we just went on before the dogs, and we would look at them, and we'd go on before the water hoses, and we would look at it, and we'd just go on singing. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. And then we would be thrown in the paddy wagons, and sometimes we were stacked in there like sardines in a can, and they would throw us in, and old Bull would say, "Take them off," and they did, and we would just go in the paddy wagons singing, "We shall overcome." And every now and then we'd get in the jail, and we'd see the jailers looking through the windows, being moved by our prayers and being moved by our words and our songs, and there was a power there. And every now and then we'd get in the jail, and we'd see the jailers looking through the windows, being moved by our prayers and being moved by our words and our songs. And there was a power there which Bull Connor couldn't adjust to. And so we ended up transforming Bull into a steer, and we won our struggle in Birmingham. Now we've got to go on to Memphis just like that. I call upon you to be with us Monday. Now about injunctions. We have an injunction, and we're going into court tomorrow morning to fight this illegal, unconstitutional injunction. All we say to America is, be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of the press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right. And so just as I say, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. We are going on.
Family, thank you for giving your time, your mind, and your spirit tonight. Remember, the fight we're in is the fight we were born in. To stand for what's right, to lift each other up, and to never, ever sell your soul for anything less than dignity and truth. We keep climbing that mountain together. We keep that dream alive together. And we do it because for democracy we live, for democracy we die, for. Stay tuned, there's more to come. For those who want to understand what's really happening behind the curtain, we're going to break down the big, beautiful bill of destruction, what it means, what it takes from you, and how we fight back. All coming up right after a word from our sponsors at Daba Digital Media. Stay sharp, stay free. Visit amillions.org to learn more and keep the good fight going. This is eMillions, signing off for now.
Layoffs in places that were counting on green investment. Meanwhile, fossil fuel companies, drilling operations, and heavy manufacturing groups are getting a clear signal. Go ahead, expand. The financial incentives are back, the oversight is lighter, and the government's on board. That said, this section doesn't eliminate all green energy support. Some programs, like limited hydrogen development or geothermal investment, are still technically eligible for tax benefits. But overall, the tilt of this chapter is unmistakable. Less about reducing emissions, more about promoting US-based production, especially in oil, gas, and heavy industrial processes. If you're a homeowner, a small business owner, or someone who recently installed clean energy systems with the help of federal credits, this could be frustrating. If you're in the oil or drilling industry, it's the opposite. And for people working in jobs tied to solar, wind, or EV manufacturing, these changes create a lot of uncertainty. It's also worth noting this section doesn't really include a lot of transition support. It doesn't offer funding to help clean energy workers shift into new roles. It's mostly a turn of the faucet from green back to fossil. And the speed of that shift will probably be felt most in rural areas, small towns, and industrial hubs that were betting on clean tech investment. This section is from Title 8, subtitles B through F, and it's all about education, especially how college is paid for and how student loans are handled. Now, this part doesn't wipe out debt or offer forgiveness the way some people hope for, but it does reshape the rules around borrowing, repayment, and how the government funds higher education moving forward. One of the biggest changes here is a new cap on how much students can borrow for graduate programs. Right now, if you're pursuing a master's, a PhD, or a professional degree like law or medicine, you can usually take out federal loans up to the cost of attendance. But under this bill, that amount would now be capped at $50,000 total. Not per year, total. For many graduate programs, especially private ones, $50,000 barely scratches the surface. So if this goes through, students would have to either come up with the rest out of pocket or look for private loans, which usually come with higher interest rates and fewer protections. Now, this change is being pitched as a way to control college inflation. The idea being that if students can't borrow unlimited sums, schools won't keep raising tuition unchecked. And while that sounds good in theory, the short-term effect could make graduate school less accessible for low and middle-income students. So yeah, this one's going to spark some strong opinions. Besides the loan cap, the bill also limits how loan forgiveness programs are applied. The popular public service loan forgiveness program and other income-driven repayment plans are not eliminated, but the bill tries to narrow their scope. That means fewer types of jobs would qualify, and the terms for forgiveness could take longer to reach. The argument here is that blanket forgiveness is too expensive, especially when paired with other spending cuts. But for borrowers who are counting on those programs to make their debt manageable, it might feel like the rug is being pulled out. What's more, the bill includes new reporting requirements for schools. Basically, colleges will now have to report the earnings of their graduates alongside their tuition rates. This is part of a value for money push. If your degree costs $80,000, but the average grad only earns $35,000 a year, that school might face penalties or lose access to some federal funds. It's meant to hold institutions accountable for their outcomes. And speaking of outcomes, the bill also goes after low-performing colleges, especially those with high dropout rates or heavy reliance on federal loans. These schools could see stricter oversight, and in some cases, they might be barred from accepting federal aid altogether. That's a serious blow for for-profit institutions, which are often flagged in this section. On the flip side, the bill expands Pell Grant eligibility for short-term credentialing programs, things like coding boot camps, nursing certifications, or skilled trades training. The idea here is to support students who want to build job-ready skills quickly, rather than commit to a four-year degree. That's a pretty practical shift, and honestly, it reflects the way a lot of people are thinking about education right now. And if you're a student parent or caring for a dependent, there are a few updates here as well. Some of the changes we talked about earlier, like the dependent care tax credits, work alongside student benefits, especially if you're juggling family and school. It's not a full financial solution, but it helps lighten the load in some cases. Another subtle change, the bill adds more oversight for student loan servicers, the companies that collect payments and handle customer service for federal loans. They'll be required to meet stricter performance benchmarks. And there are new rules about how they report information and handle errors. This is good news for borrowers who've had frustrating experiences with poor communication or incorrect billing. And just a quick note, employers who help pay off student loans can still offer tax-free contributions under this bill. That's an extension of a pandemic-era benefit, and it sticks around for now. If your workplace offers it, definitely take advantage. So what does all of this mean in plain terms? Basically, we're seeing a shift from open access to tighter control. The bill aims to rein in college costs and limit government exposure to big loan balances. It does that by capping borrowing, tightening forgiveness, and scrutinizing how much value a degree actually provides. But it also raises real concerns about equity. If you limit loans without addressing tuition inflation directly, you risk pushing people out of graduate programs or into more expensive private debt. The changes to Pell Grants and short-term programs are a step toward modernizing education funding, but they don't entirely entirely balance out the restrictions elsewhere. And the oversight piece, the school performance metrics, and loan servicer accountability, those could end up being the most impactful in the long run. They shift some of the responsibility back to institutions and away from students, which might be overdue. Still, for borrowers, students, and families trying to plan ahead, the uncertainty is real. The rules of the game are changing, and a lot of the old assumptions, like borrowing what you need and paying it off over time, don't apply the same way anymore. This section comes from Title IX and Title X of the bill, and it focuses on immigration, border security, and how the federal government plans to enforce and fund both. This part of the legislation is pretty detailed and honestly a bit loaded politically, but it outlines exactly where the administration wants to put its resources when it comes to immigration enforcement and processing. Right out of the gate, this section allocates new funding for the border wall. Yep, that same wall from the previous administration. The bill revives construction efforts, specifically stating that the Secretary of Homeland Security is required to resume building it. No delays, no legal loopholes. The money's already been appropriated, and the directive now is to use it. What's more, it limits the power of the Secretary to cancel or reprogram that funding. So even if a future administration wanted to stop the project, they couldn't just sign an executive order to halt it. This makes the wall funding a lot more locked in than it was before. And it's not just the wall. Border Patrol and IC receive big boosts in funding too. The bill greenlights money for hiring thousands of new agents, buying more surveillance tech, and expanding detention capacity. That means more officers on the ground and more facilities to hold people awaiting immigration decisions. Now here's where it starts to get more controversial. Asylum laws are changing too. The bill narrows the criteria for who can claim asylum, making it harder to qualify. For example, individuals must now meet a stricter, credible fear standard and may be disqualified if they pass through another country without seeking asylum there first. That last part's known as a transit ban, and it's been debated in courts before. Now it's codified in the bill. And for those who do apply, the bill aims to fast track asylum processing, which sounds good, but in practice it means less time for legal review. That's raising concerns among immigration advocates who worry that people might not have enough time to present their case before being deported. Besides asylum, the bill raises certain visa fees to fund enforcement. If you're applying for a work visa, green card, or adjustment of status, you might pay more under these new rules. Those fee hikes are meant to help cover the cost of expanded enforcement, but they'll also hit applicants directly in the pocket. Another thing, catch and release policies are restricted here. The bill says that border agents can't just release migrants into the U.S. with a court date unless specific legal conditions are met. Instead, it pushes for either detention or expedited removal, depending on the case. This policy has been used before, but the new language makes it much harder to undo in the future. Oh, and here's something you might not expect. The bill also includes a pause on work authorization for certain asylum seekers. That means people who apply for asylum could have to wait longer before they're allowed to legally work in the U.S., even while their case is being processed. That delay puts financial pressure on applicants and may deter some from filing in the first place. On top of that, there's a rule that allows state attorneys general to sue if the federal government doesn't enforce immigration law the way it's written in this bill. That's a big shift. It gives states more legal standing to challenge federal policy, especially if they believe border enforcement is being too lenient. And for border states, there's a separate clause that allows deployment of National Guard troops in certain cases without needing federal approval. That kind of authority could be used to bolster state-run immigration crackdowns, especially in places like Texas or Arizona. Now, critics argue that these changes could overwhelm the immigration courts, lead to more family separations, and force people to return to dangerous conditions. So supporters say it's about restoring order and deterring illegal entry. And honestly, both of those perspectives are already playing out in the public debate. So if you or someone you know is going through an immigration process or considering one, this bill makes the path more expensive, more time sensitive, and more restrictive overall. Legal immigration isn't banned, but the rules are tighter and the costs are higher. And for asylum seekers, the window to qualify has gotten a lot smaller. And one last note, this section doesn't include any sort of broader immigration reform. No new pathways to citizenship. No expanded work visa programs. No relief for dreamers or long-term undocumented residents. It's enforcement heavy, with very little attention on long-term fixes. This part of the bill doesn't always get much attention, but it matters a lot because this is where you find the fine print. The timelines, the phase-ins, the expiration dates, and the hidden legal mechanisms that shape how this bill actually plays out in the real world. Let's start with when things take effect. Most of the major tax changes, benefit limits, and policy shifts begin on January 1st, 2026. So you won't see everything change overnight, but the clock is already ticking. Some of the Medicaid cost sharing changes won't fully kick in until 2027 or 2028, and a lot of the student loan changes are timed to affect the next academic cycle. That's important because it gives Congress time to adjust or quietly let things expire before the next election. Speaking of expiration, many provisions in this bill come with sunset clauses. That means they automatically end after 5 years unless Congress votes to extend them. Things like the senior tax bonus, the Trump account deposits, and even some of the healthcare changes are temporary on paper. That makes the bill look cheaper, but it also means nothing here is permanent unless it becomes politically popular enough to survive. Now here's where it gets more serious. This bill puts strong limits on how much federal agencies can delay or reinterpret what's written. The IRS, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Education are all required to enforce these rules as written. No more regulatory flexibility, even during emergencies. If the law says benefits must be cut, they have to cut them. If the rule changes eligibility, they have to enforce it. It ties the hands of future administrations and gives Congress tighter control. And if they don't enforce it, well, the bill gives legal standing to states and individuals to sue. So if a federal agency tries to soften or slow roll enforcement, a state attorney general or affected party can file a lawsuit to force compliance. That could lead to more court challenges, especially around controversial issues like immigration, benefit cuts, or agency power. But here's where it gets tricky. Buried inside Section 70302 is a provision that could limit your ability to get help from the courts unless you can afford it. Under this clause, if you try to challenge the government's action or ask a court to pause enforcement, you may be required to pay a bond up front. If you can't post that bond, the court might not even hear your request. Legal experts say this could shut the courthouse door to regular people, especially those affected by benefit cuts, healthcare denials, or policy changes, unless they can afford to pay just to be heard. That's a quiet but powerful shift. It doesn't eliminate your right to sue, but it puts a price on exercising it. So what does all of this mean? The real power of this bill isn't just in the benefits it cuts or the policies it changes. It's in the way it locks those changes in, limits who can challenge them. It makes future reversals more difficult. Some parts might not seem urgent yet, but they're designed to stick and to keep you from undoing them easily. This is about structure, control, and making sure that what's passed today doesn't quietly fade away tomorrow. And that's the bill, or at least the real bones of it. The big, beautiful bill might have sounded like just another piece of legislation, but now you've seen how each section connects back to everyday life. Whether it's your paycheck, your benefits, your internet, your future plans, the decisions in here shape what's possible, what's affordable, and what's protected. Some people are excited about these changes. Others are worried. But most is that you're informed. Because no matter where you stand, understanding what's actually written in these laws is how we hold power and how we stay ready. So if any part of this breakdown helped you today, take a second to like the video and maybe share it with someone who might not have time to read a 900-page bill. Most people don't, but that's why we're here. And if you've got thoughts, agreements, concerns, questions, drop them in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going because this stuff, it affects all of us. And yeah, we're in it together. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.